I don't know who needs to hear this today, but stop running away from your team if you can't do Rambo things. Okay, so if you're unfamiliar as to what all this is, I give you easy to follow advice to improve your can opening, roach stomping, or, depending on the future, humanoid ventilating abilities. This is not your standard perfect weapons and setup video, because I think it's a lot more valuable to give you the why and how. If you only understand the solution to one problem, you can only answer that specific problem. If you understand how to discover solutions, you can answer any problem facing you. Call me crazy, but I like to teach you something instead of just telling you the answers, because if public school taught me anything, it's that you may know the answers on the test, but it doesn't mean you learned anything. My apologies in advance, as this one might end up being just a tad controversial. I have seen people get frustrated with others playing this way before. I ask that you keep in mind we are looking at the ideal example, not the one with poor execution. My personal opinion is that this role is completely fine if you aren't wasting time or resources and you finish what you start. The roamer gets a terrible, like just absolutely horrific reputation because people will get a bunch of samples, walk off in whatever direction they want, die across the map from extract, and nobody gets anything. We all know one person that plays like that, and if you don't, look, I'm sorry, son, but it's probably you. When done correctly, though, this position is wildly beneficial to your team because it allows the majority to focus routing to the main mission while someone else covers the side objectives and points of interest. The role is circumstantial depending on whether or not your team can handle themselves and how much you value them. If you actually care and they are getting destroyed, don't leave them, or leave them in an intelligent manner that we'll discuss later. If their well being is unimportant to you, or you've discussed the plan beforehand, feel free to go about your journey. It's also majorly dependent on how you handle yourself. If you gather all the samples on the map, but you die too far from extract for it to matter, it means nothing. Now, in defense of them, the good ones are absolutely sensational, but you're never going to notice them. Hell, you've probably come across some in the past, you've just not been aware that they've existed, because one, they are completely unseen, they just go off and do their thing immediately, and they do it incredibly efficiently. So it's very hard to notice nothing's going wrong. Back to the topic at hand, though. You are taking on the world alone. Understand the risk that that brings along with it. You can do it. It's not gonna feel like sunshine and lollipops past difficulty 5 or 6-ish. It's gonna feel like you came home from a hard day's work and all you want is an ice cold glass of water. You take a big old sip and it's just straight vodka. Is everything suddenly more difficult and uncomfortable? Yeah. Yeah, there's a little burning sensation, but are you still going to commit to finishing what you just started? Oh, absolutely you are. Mama didn't raise no quitter. Honestly, the best candidate for this job is a very brave and a durable loot goblin. Don't worry, I'll be done with the exposition part of this soon. It's just very crucial that you know this only works if you're at the least just a touch clinically insane. You are engulfing yourself in a massive sea of danger, and if you screw up, everyone's going to be looking at you like a wet pile of saltines. You basically have to be a honey badger hopped up on the stuff that ruined Lindsay Lohan's career, if you know what I mean. There's a really weird return on investment here once you get good enough at it. It's not even the loot as one would expect, which, the loot's great, but it's that you just kind of stop dying. You're just used to dealing with chaos and swarms and all sorts of hell around you that you just live in it now. You quickly identify your biggest threats and then just walk down the line removing them one by one. If you're doing this, though, you gotta start things small. Rome wasn't built in a day, that whole spiel. Don't stray too far from your group at the beginning. All you gotta do is run the outskirts of their mission path. You collect some extra dosh, you never put yourself somewhere too risky, and if you make a mistake, your team is nearby. This is going to handle a few big stepping stones for you. You'll come to recognize all the different points of interests, as well as the tactical objectives. You'll get used to spotting anti-air turret fire, jammer pulses, scanning tower eyes, the tops of spore spewers and shrieker nests, so on and so forth. Same goes for recognizing how to collect loot hanging around points of interest, from locating crates to gathering samples. If you've never noticed, the icon for a nearby point of interest on your map or the compass at the top of your screen is a question mark. Once discovered, it'll change to a diamond. Once you have collected everything in that area, the icon will change on your map from a diamond to a pin. If you can do that enough times without getting unceremoniously gutted, then you can move on to the more advanced approach. That approach entails branching out further and removing enemies in a more violent and expeditious manner. You're not hanging out across the map yet, but you'd be able to cross it without wasting reinforcements, and you can get your things back should you die. That's the sort of benchmark we're looking at. When you're taking baby steps away from your team, they can still support you if you need cover to fall back upon. The further you go away, the less that luxury is afforded to you. This means you will need to have an array of equipment that can handle every category of enemy you will come across. This is where I would usually give you some outlines as to what you would want to use, but I'm not doing that this time. I will only say, at the least, you must be able to take out something as big as a Hulk or a Charger. There's a few reasons I won't specify this. Simplest one being, there's actually a lot of things that can pull that off, and I may suggest something that gets nerfed in the future and won't be as useful. The slightly more complicated, and what I would believe to be more important reason is, you need to go back to taking it easy at stage 1 if you can't come up with anything you can confidently kill those with off the top of your head. This is not supposed to be rude or elitist in any way. It's to prevent yourself from depriving your team of a member and having nothing to show for it. It's just making sure you get your worth. If you're trying to roam further but die, let's say, 3 or so times, you probably need more practice doing it closer to your squad again. There's nothing shameful in practicing the basics somewhere a touch easier for a while. Never permit your pride to overpower your reason. There is a reason every culture has a story about hubris reaping horrible consequences for those who exercise it. Like I said, Rome was not built in a day, but it definitely fell in one. Finding success in Stage 2 is not only determined by lack of personal loss, but team gain. How many samples did you acquire? What points of interest have you discovered? Have you been removing tactical objectives, etc.? Stage 2 is perfectly acceptable as a stopping point. Hell, Stage 1 is an okay stopping point. You're not doing anything too dangerous, and you should be getting good value out of your journeys. Understand, if you want to turn it up to Stage 3, you will need to put in the work to ascend and achieve goblinhood. This is not a task that is easily undergone. All it takes is a singular death in the wrong place to make everything for naught. You will need to recognize when your team does and does not need your assistance. I'll pose you a question, a theoretical situation, if you will. Your team is being held down on objective by artillery to the west. A stratagem jammer up the hill to the far east encompasses both locations, and you've got eats off of cooldown. What do you do? Take your time to answer. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think it over. I have no Jeopardy theme song, so we're just going to sit in silence. Okay, time's up. Some of you would think, shut down the jammer, drop your eats, use the high ground to demolish the artillery. That seems like the big brain play. You would be incorrect. Mortars pose the more immediate danger, and your teammates can't be revived with that jammer up there. Running to the jammer would subject them to a prolonged and more precise bombardment, as the artillery no longer aims for you, likely resulting in their deaths. You instead break west and destroy the mortars with grenades before doubling back and removing the jammer. By the time you're done with that, your friends will likely have removed the objectives. Scenarios like that require a more seasoned variety of roamer who's been around the block their fair share of times. Not only do they recognize the biggest threat to their team, but they also realize the team doesn't need its fourth member right now. It needs someone to break off and handle business. You must be in tune with the well-being of your team. Understand, if you leave them and you don't do anything, you have unintentionally made everyone weaker. If you are going to handicap your team with one less member, whatever you go and do needs to be impactful enough to make up for your absence. Points of interest are all well and good. Everybody likes loot, but it's not worth crippling your squad for. Take out gunship fabricators, destroy a scanner tower, remove anti-air capabilities, collapse a stalker nest. Those are worth risking your group not being a quartet for the time being. Another worthy cause is crossing the map for sub-objectives to further the grand progress of your mission. You will be dealing with the tough choice of determining whether or not the best thing you can do for your team is step away, weighing if they can fend for themselves long enough for you to complete your task, and whether or not your task is even for the greater good. As I said before, you aren't out of the danger either. It's a very high-risk, high-reward strategy that trades dangerous tasks for extra time and resources like experience, currency, or additional reinforcements. If you fail, it's a pretty bad look for you. And it's a pretty bad look if you leave your team to die while also getting nothing done. The gravity of this position is not to be taken lightly. The higher you progress through the ranks, the more dangerous of a situation you delve yourself into. I do consider all of these roles to be accessible for everyone who wants to practice them. However, if you don't enjoy that white-knuckle pressure of knowing your team depends on you to pull this off, I suggest you take this rather slowly. Start doing it with a teammate even, then have them give you some independence once you've gotten a hold of things. At the end of the day, you walked into a match with a team, so it's your job to try your best and help, even if it's indirectly. You can get used to the cold by diving right into an ice bath, but it's better to start with a cold shower so you can gradually familiarize yourself with the uncomfortable. Learning in small degrees is learning nonetheless, and often more productive for people than repeatedly jumping into a meat grinder in hopes that at one point or another you'll dodge the blades. If you start small and you work your ass off, you will not only be the most valuable member of the team, but an invaluable member of the team. Since I'm finishing up here, let's have some fun. I want you to share a horror story about a teammate who thought they could conquer the world and ended up looking like a pork chop in a piranha tank. And one more thing. The people dead set on being John Rambo or Bear Grylls out on their own, but keep failing, often refuse help for whatever reason, and they're nearly incorrigible in that moment. It's a shame, but if you're not the match leader, the best you can do is laugh to yourself about it while they insist upon running into the same wall over and over again. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than getting annoyed. Hopefully this is able to keep you from feeding the enemy and actually furthering some of your team's efforts. On a completely unrelated note, big things seem to be on their way in regards to new enemies, guns, etc., so I may end up making a guide on how to kill them all. Thank you for spending some time with me. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves and have a good night.